Hello, and welcome to Prologue for Beautiful, the Carole King musical. My name is Fiona Kyle, and I'm the Literary Manager and Artistic Associate here at Geva. Beautiful's music and lyrics are by Carole King and Gerry Goffin, and Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, and the book is by the late playwright Douglas McGrath. This is a co-production with Pioneer Theatre Company out in Salt Lake City, Utah, directed by their artistic director, Karen Azenberg, with choreography by Jerry McIntyre, whose work you saw at the start of the season when he directed and choreographed Young Frankenstein. The set, which evokes the world of music, was designed by Jason Sims, and the fabulous costumes that range from sequins to 1960s mod were designed by Cara Harmon. I want to start by giving you a brief overview of this Tony Award-winning musical. After initial development of the script and score, musicals often start their life in what we call a Broadway tryout at a regional theater. Beautiful started out at the Curran Theater in San Francisco, California in 2013, before it moved to the Stephen Sondheim Theater on Broadway in 2014. It went on to win the Tony for Best Leading Actress for Jessie Mueller and Best Sound Design for Brian Ronan, and it received Tony nominations for Best Orchestrations, Best Book, and Best Musical as well. It ran on Broadway until 2019 and boasted of 2,418 regular performances plus 60 preview performances. In 2015, a production of Beautiful premiered in London's West End at the Aldwych Theatre, and it ran there until 2017. It's had numerous tours in the United States and United Kingdom, as well as Australia. Beautiful follows the early life of one of America's most renowned and prolific singer-songwriters, Carole King. It's considered both a jukebox musical, meaning it shares the songs we all know and love, and a bio-musical, which looks at the life of its titular character. Douglas McGrath was approached by producer Paul Blake to write the book, and he, of course, met with King as well as Gerry Goffin, Barry Mann, and Cynthia Weil as he was working on the project. You can read more about his process of writing the musical in your programs, but I want to highlight something he said. Before meeting them, I had only known one thing about these writers, that they were talented. But now I saw that they were interesting. Beautiful explores the life of Carole King and her close friends and collaborators truthfully. You can find biographies of them in your program. Since this musical details the lives of these artists so faithfully, and you'll learn more about them during the show itself, I want to focus on the world you'll find yourselves in. The world of the Brill Building, where you'll spend a lot of time in Beautiful, especially in Act 1. The Brill Building was located on 1619 Broadway on 49th Street, just north of Times Square in New York City, but it was really 4 different buildings. The Turf, a restaurant on the corner of Broadway and 49th, the interior of which was filled with sheet music from the 1940s and 50s. 1697 Broadway, which housed the Ed Sullivan Show from 1953 to 1971, and is now the Ed Sullivan Theater, where Stephen Colbert hosts The Late Show, and 1650 Broadway, which is where King and Goffin, Mann and Weil all had their offices. The Brill Building, in many ways, was the natural progression from Tin Pan Alley, originally located on West 28th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues. Tin Pan Alley started in 1885 when sheet music publishers began to set up shop in that district. It became a thriving area where the most renowned songwriters of the period did their best work, several of whom you've heard on the Wilson stage recently, including Harold Allen, composer of The Wizard of Oz, and Fats Waller, the music of Ain't Misbehavin', as well as Irving Berlin, George Gershwin, Scott Joplin, and Cole Porter, just to name a few. Tin Pan Alley's music ranged from ballads, comic songs, to ragtime jazz and blues, and was a major contributor to the Great American Songbook. In many ways, there would be no Carole King without Tin Pan Alley. In his first interview with them, King told book writer Doug McGrath, "We studied the music of Gershwin and Berlin," and Weil added that she wanted to be Cole Porter. The birth of rock and roll in the 1950s signaled the end for Tin Pan Alley, which ceded its prominence to the Brill Building. The Brill housed 100 tenants in 1940 and grew to 165 businesses by 1962. The main producers at the Brill were George Shadow Morton, responsible for Leader of the Pack by the Shangri-Las, the infamous Phil Spector and his Wall of Sound, and Don Kirshner, who founded Alden Music with Al Nevins in 1958. Kirshner had an idea that they needed to capitalize on music for young people by young people. Guitarist Stevie Van Zandt of Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band said that the Brill Building was partly what created the American teenager in the 1950s and early 60s. The soundtrack of their lives was being written and recorded at the Brill. The Brill was one-stop shopping for musicians, performers, and songwriters. Songwriters could write a song in one of their small offices at 1619 or 1650. Mike Stoller, writer of classics like Hound Dog and Stand By Me, said if someone needed a bass player to do a demo, they could call or run over to the Turf restaurant and see who was there. They could then go to one of the Brill studios, record the demo, and then shop it to publishers without having to get on the subway or even leave the building. There were photographers and promoters housed within the Brill complex as well. Anything you needed to be a teen heartthrob was there. One of Kirshner's first hitmakers and teen idols was Neil Sedaka. Sedaka said that the walls of their offices were so thin, you could hear the other writers working. He could hear his own melodies influencing the other writers and vice versa, and he said he felt it created a healthy sense of competition. These writers weren't trying to steal from each other. They were trying to write better and better songs. Sedaka wrote music for others to perform, but he wanted to sing his own work. His first #1 hit was Oh, Carole. While the song title lost the E in Carole, it was written for his high school girlfriend, Carole Klein, who he grew up with in Brooklyn, not too terribly far from Coney Island, where they both performed with their own bands on the boardwalk. We, of course, know her today as Carole King. In Beautiful, you'll watch King meet Jerry Goffin, who would become her songwriting collaborator and first husband, and write those songs that helped to create the Brill Building sound, such as Will You Love Me Tomorrow, The Locomotion, and Up on the Roof. You'll also hear Weil and Mann's most iconic songs, including He's Sure the Boy I Love and You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'. King and Goffin also wrote Chains, which was a hit in 1962 for the girl group The Cookies, but was also featured on the 1963 debut album of the band that would end the prominence of the Brill Building, the Beatles. The start of the British invasion, led by the Beatles, and then the rise of the singer-songwriter movement, led by people like Bob Dylan, changed the face of popular music. Don Kirshner realized what was happening in the industry and asked the pair to write a song for the Monkees, the band who started as a TV show inspired by Beatles films, and that song was 1967's Pleasant Valley Sunday. It was, however, toward the end of the road for the pair. In 1968, King and Goffin divorced, and King moved to Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, California, with their 2 daughters. She released an album with her band The City in that year, but her reluctance to tour and leave her children, as well as her nerves about singing live, meant they didn't receive much notice. She released her first solo album, Writer, in 1970 on Lou Adler's Ode label, and she asked her new friend, James Taylor, to play guitar on it and sing background vocals. But it was her second album that helped transition King from a songwriter to a famous singer-songwriter. Recorded at the same time as Joni Mitchell recorded Blue in a studio just down the hall, 1971's Tapestry won King 4 Grammys. She won for Album of the Year, Best Pop Vocal Performance Female, Record of the Year for It's Too Late, and Song of the Year for You've Got a Friend. It spent 15 consecutive weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200 and is 14 times certified platinum in the United States as of today. Tapestry launched her solo career, and it also inspired a host of musicians to become singer-songwriters in their own right. Tapestry's influence can be felt on Amy Winehouse, Tori Amos, Joan Armatrading, and Sharon Van Etten, to name just a few. James Taylor wrote of the album, "It was a big change for Carole to leave New York for LA. She left behind an established, hugely successful career as a Brill-era tunesmith and went west on her own. She started writing by herself about herself, that is to say, from her own life. It came out of her so strong, so fierce and fresh, so clearly in her own voice, and yet so immediately accessible, so familiar. You knew these songs already." There's a symmetry that so many songs on Tapestry have gone on to be hits for other people, just like the beginning of her career. James Taylor's version of You've Got a Friend was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2001, 1 year before her version was. King has always been reluctant to talk about her own work, preferring to let it speak for itself. So I'd love to share some words by singer-songwriter Rickie Lee Jones to carry with you during the performance. Tapestry was the most important record of its time. I won't qualify it by saying female, songwriter, or any of that. It signaled the country and the people's desire to have a simple and beautiful song to sing. Years later, it remains undaunted and timeless, as it is reflected in the voices of women who discover the songs as if they were just written last year. Easy enough to remember, haunting enough to want to remember. That is the mark of a great song and a great songwriter. Thank you so much for joining me for Prologue, and I hope you'll enjoy Beautiful, the Carole King musical.